Proposed updates to WSDA's pesticide licensing and recertification programs, laws and rules, in response to EPA's new federal certification and training rule. This presentation will cover the rule background and expected timeline. As mentioned in the title slide, the proposed updates to Washington's pesticide program and our laws and rules are in response to an update to EPA's federal pesticide certification and training rules passed back in 2017. Before we cover what that means and the timeline involved, let's talk about why a change to EPA's rules affects Washington in the first place. As we all could probably guess, pesticides have been around for a really long time. Estimates put the first pesticide use somewhere around 4,500 years ago in Mesopotamia. The regulation of pesticides, though, is fairly new in the grand scheme of things. Pesticides were largely unregulated for a really long time because we just didn't understand the potential risks that pesticide use poses. So after many years of unregulated pesticide use in the United States, let's fast forward to the 1900s. Technological advancements were making agriculture a lot more efficient, so farmers were able to plant more of one crop in an area. As you can imagine, the more of one crop you plant together, the more insects are going to be attracted to that crop. So farmers were starting to apply significantly more pesticides than ever before to keep up with pest pressure. Unfortunately, pesticide manufacturing and distributing companies were able to take advantage of the lack of regulations and were selling farmers products that were not as advertised, products that were less efficient, or just not at all the formulation that they claimed to be. Because of that, the Federal Insecticide Act, or FIA, was put into place in 1910. That act held pesticide distributors accountable and protected the farmer as a consumer, which is great, but it didn't include any regulations that actually protected public health or the environment, which is not so great. But again, at the time, we really just didn't have the same knowledge that we have today about the risk. As time progressed and we did become more knowledgeable about those risks, eventually in 1947, the Federal Insecticide Act was amended to become what we are all familiar with as FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. And that did include some regulation with the intent to protect public health and the environment, and included some basic pesticide registration and labeling requirements. This was the first legislation that actually started to show some concern for things like pesticide residues on food and exposure to non-target organisms. At the time, FIFRA was under the jurisdiction of the United States Department of Agriculture. There were a series of events causing increasing public concern about a variety of environmental issues, and that led to the inception of the Environmental Protection Agency in 1970. FIFRA was then transferred from underneath USDA to be implemented by EPA, which makes sense. Pesticides had become much more than an agricultural issue and included lots of uses that fit better under EPA than USDA. Shortly after EPA came to be, they amended FIFRA to address some growing concerns about pesticides. That amendment included two major updates relevant to this video. One of those updates was the classification of general and restricted use products. This allowed the riskier products to be easily identified in a way that had never been done before. The other important piece of that amendment was that it established the ability for EPA to have a program that regulates restricted use pesticides. EPA took a couple years to think about exactly what that program needed to look like, and in 1974, they published their federal certification and training rules. They allowed states to each use this set of rules and regulate pesticides in their own state as they saw fit, as long as they meet or exceed those federal standards. So, that was the jumping off point that WSDA used to create the program that we have today, making sure that we are meeting or exceeding those federal standards. I just wanted to emphasize that 1974 was a long time ago. Our knowledge of pesticide safety has increased vastly since that rule was initially written in 1974. That being said, the first update EPA has made to that rule since it was very first implemented in the 70s was just a few years ago. Back in 2015, EPA announced that they intended to update the federal certification and training rules for the first time in 40+ years. They shared their initial draft with states, and we at WSDA, along with other state departments of agriculture, realized that some of those proposed changes just weren't going to work for our licensees. Washington State, along with many other states, put together comments to EPA to let them know what was realistic for our state. And EPA did take many of those comments into consideration, and they updated the proposed rule to a new version that created less hardship on states and our licensees. That final rule was published in 2017. At that point, Washington State Department of Ag really started delving into that rule to see what areas our state doesn't currently meet and figuring out where we would need to make changes in order to meet or exceed the new federal standards. Much of what Washington State currently does, fortunately, does meet EPA standards, but there are some areas that we will need to make some changes. So while there will be some changes coming, there are many steps left in the process before any changes could take effect. All of these potential updates are a few years down the road. We put together a new state plan where we let EPA know how Washington's pesticide licensing and recertification program operates. For those areas where our current system doesn't meet EPA's new requirements, we put together a proposed plan for how we intend to change our program so that we start meeting those requirements. We really put a lot of thought into our new state plan. We wanted to make sure that we were doing things in a way that created the least amount of hardship for licensees and for ourselves as well. That state plan was submitted to EPA for their review back in 2020. Washington's state plan was officially approved by EPA headquarters in December of 2022. After having our plan approved by EPA, we still have a few steps before anything would be implemented. For some of these changes, we'll need to update our rules and regulations. WSDA introduced a legislative proposal to the Director's Office in 2022, and we'll be presenting that package in 2023 during the legislative session. We anticipate these statutory changes being complete by January of the following year. Then, in spring of 2024, we can start the process of updating our rules, the Washington Administrative Code, starting with the CR 101. Update of those rules should be completed by spring of 2025. We plan to allow a grace period and then finally start abiding by those updates in fall of 2025. So we know that there will be change ahead, and we've created a series of videos outlining the different proposed areas of change. Even though none of these updates are completely set in stone, it was important to us to start sharing our plan with our licensees and stakeholders. There are a lot of potential updates coming, and we want to be as transparent as possible and make sure that everyone is aware and able to plan for any changes that may affect them. We don't want anyone to feel surprised by this. We would encourage you to view the videos that are relevant to you and the work that you do. Our plan is to update these videos as more information is available so that licensees and stakeholders are kept in the loop. If you have any questions about this presentation, please contact us at pestlicenseupdates@agr.wa.gov. You can also call the main line at 877-301-4555 and transfer to Lindsay House or Kylie Adney. Thank you for watching the certification and training plan presentation. Stay tuned for more updates.